Okay, welcome to the GearScout Podcast, where we talk tactical and things that go bang. My name's Christian Lowe, and with me today, as always, is Glock Master Chris Cleary. How's it going, Chris?
What's up, brother? How you been?
I'm good. Hey, we've got a special podcast for you this week as Chris and I teamed up for the first time to do an in-depth video review of the new Glock 44. That video will be coming out a little bit later, but we decided to do a little bit of a new type of test for Glock's new blaster, and we think you'll be interested in what we found out. But first, a little bit of gun world news, Chris. You know, Sig is on a roll leading up to SHOT Show, which is coming up in mid-January, January 21st. And they've been rolling out a ton of announcements. Our last podcast, we talked a lot about the new Cross rifle. But a little bit before that, they slipped in this other little announcement that'll be especially relevant for our more kind of military veteran, kind of operationally tactical type person audience. And that is, they're actually taking some of the M17, the militarized P320s that they used for the test period that the Army was, or the DoD, but the Army principally was using to figure out which direction they'd go on the new modular handgun system. They were looking at, I forget all three, they were looking at primarily at Glock and Sig in that contest when it narrowed down. Sig sent out a bunch of M17s, not only to like domestic, CONUS Army units and stuff to test out, but also OCONUS. So there were some soldiers who were carrying these overseas in Afghanistan and other places. And Sig has decided to sell those used surplus M17s to the civilian market, which is totally cool. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I'm like super jealous and super into it. I would really like to get my hands on one of these. And, I think it's kind of a cool touch for them to do that. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So look, I'm naive when it comes to this because as a, I immediately think, oh, M17, love to get my hands on one. I could probably get a deal on it because it's a used gun. But what I'm sure is going to happen is these are going to become ridiculously hard to get their hands on, and it's probably going to become almost like a collector's item. And my question is, you're going to probably, even if you could get your hand on one, you're going to pay more for it, or how do you even go about doing that? Has Sig released anything on their site? Because look at, I'm a Glock guy, but I would admit that would be something I would be greatly interested in getting my hands on. Although it sounds like it's going to be something impossible to actually come up with unless you were somebody in the know.
It may very well be. In their announcement, they said limited quantities available soon. Call your local dealer for pricing and availability. So I don't know. I have reached out to them. I am trying to pry one out of their hands, particularly since we work, the GearScout is part of the Military Times family. And I thought it would be cool for us to have one of the ones that was actually, deployed to soldiers overseas, as we could use it as a model and all that kind of stuff for photography and other things. They said that they have the they feature a Coyote Tan PVD coated stainless steel slide, Coyote Tan controls, and a Coyote Tan medium carry grip module with U.S. government slide markings and serial numbers. The cool thing about them is some of them have markings on them from the armorer and stuff, at the particular unit and things like that, right? You know how they write like in that sort of weird green pen on things and all that kind of stuff? Some of them have that. They come with with 117 round magazines and two 21 round mags. And they include an official Sig Sauer M17 certificate of authenticity, and comes packed just as the handguns were delivered to the U.S. military as well. So in this kind of cardboard box and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. And yeah, you're right. I don't know how many there are. I do know that it is obviously a limited quantity, but it's like it's for one of those people that like really has to have the real deal and a collector and
Yeah.
that kind of thing, right? And I just think it's sort of I've never heard of this before. I've actually never heard. There's lots of these firearms companies that submit, prototypes and a certain number of their firearms to the military for testing. I've never heard of them reselling those.
So, and that's and then the question would be, what's the number? I mean, how many do you
Right.
think are out there? In the hundreds, in the thousands?
No, it's probably
How?
hundreds.
Yeah. So then, look, those are going to go like hotcakes. Um, I'm surprised people don't have dibs on them already. Uh, and there probably could have been another way that Sig could have released these to the public. But you go to the website, you want a piece of military history. If nothing, it's a great marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Because people are going to definitely want to get them. Again, not being a SIG guy, I would, I'd be very interested in getting my hands on one.
Yeah. It'd be cool. Well, if Military Times / GearScout can get their hands on one, we'll definitely do a little video on it and show people what we got. And I'd be happy to take one to the range with you and let you sling some lead with it. I still think it's kind of an interesting thing for a company like this to do. I've never really heard of this happening. I wonder if Glock would follow suit on theirs, on their military version of the 19X. It seems like it would be an excellent follow-up for them to try this. It might be a question that's worth asking when we see them out at SHOT Show, but I just think it's sort of an intriguing, and you're right, an interesting and potentially effective kind of marketing ploy, quote unquote, to kind of show off a little end zone dance for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good for them.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see them come out.
Well, not much else in the news for the tactical world this week. We've had this is a holiday season, and yeah, we're hurtling pretty quickly up to SHOT Show, and so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of announcements coming out just before then, and we'll cover those as we get them. But what we're really here to talk about today is. Look, Chris and I decided to team up for a video review of the Glock 44. As many of you remember, the Glock 44 was announced a couple weeks ago. It is Glock's first dedicated .22 handgun. And Chris, as you know, there was a lot of hype coming up to this announcement in typical Glock fashion. They were, had all kinds of crazy marketing campaigns of people hiking in the woods and doing all this kind of stuff, and it led people to believe that Glock was really taking a hard direction change in what they were doing. There were people talking about a PCC. There were people talking about a bolt gun. There were people talking about an AR, and then they announced it was a Glock pistol that was chambered in .22. And people just sort of went, what? And I know. And I remember I was at the media event for this, and I had some good friends there, and we were sort of chit-chatting after the announcement. And I love the folks at Glock. I love working with them. They're great folks, and a couple of them have been very, very good friends for a long, long time. And but a couple of us sort of commented under our breath, they could have just sent us a press release on this one. But
Yeah.
Did you have a similar reaction when you heard about this? I mean, I think I called you as soon as I got home from that event, and what'd you think?
So we talked about this before. And I'm a Glock fanboy. That's no surprise to anybody. I've wanted a .22 caliber pistol for the longest time. I have kids that I would like to take shooting and stuff like that. They have shot a 9mm from time to time, but again, it's a big bang for them, and it's a little scary, especially for my younger kids. I've looked at the .22 conversion kits. Those can get pricey even for the Glock. And I've even looked at buying, a traditional .22 caliber handgun. Ruger has a million of them that are fun to shoot. So when this came out as a Glock, the things we talked about before, The same size magazines, the same action, and the mechanics of a traditional Glock. I was immediately hooked. And again, Glock put it out, I'll buy it eventually. But I admit, when you put it in my hands for the first time, when we actually got to the range and shot it, when I originally picked it up, you could almost confuse it for a toy, because of the polymer makeup that it has, and there's only enough metal in the slide to give it the strength that's required for its recoil. It does feel really light. It does feel like an airsoft gun. And we can get into I don't want to steal any of your thunder getting into the shooting of it. But I will say, after now having played with it, it is absolutely on my wish list to add to my collection.
Yeah, I'm not the only one in the sort of gun commentariat, out there, the gun tube nuts out there that after we kind of slept on the news and thought about it further, got a little more excited about it. Glock really marketed this primarily as a beginner gun, right? As a way to bring new shooters into the recreation of shooting, and like you just said, a less intimidating, less recoil, less noise, cheaper ammo kind of way to bring people into the shooting hobby and make them feel comfortable around firearms, and helping them learn how to manipulate them and not be super intimidated by it. And you and I both have taken new shooters to the range, and they all love the AR. They're super intimidated by the handgun. I mean, that thing is like a cannon, in their hands. Yeah. And it sucks. And yeah, I've had a 22 handgun for several years now. Years ago, I got I used to be big into Smith & Wesson M&Ps. That was my primary competition handgun and all that kind of stuff. I had just a straight stick M&P 9. And years ago, Smith & Wesson released an M&P 22C. It's a compact version of the M&P in 22 caliber. It's an 80% size to the standard M&P, and I loved that thing. I used it all the time to introduce new shooters to handguns. I had a suppressor on the end of it, which made it even more fun to shoot. It just feels great in the hand. It's almost like the frame size of a shield, an M&P shield with a slightly longer barrel, and it just worked phenomenally. I mean, I love that thing. And so I thought, well, heck, why the hell do I need a Glock 44 when I have this? But then, you and I put our heads together and decided to take a look at the second kind of marketing angle that Glock was using for the Glock 44, and that is for training. And when you think about it, it is very interesting prospect, because Glock deliberately made the Glock 44 the exact same size and dimensions as the Glock 19, which is, I think, and I'm happy to get into a debate on this, and it is a purely subjective opinion. I think the Glock 19 is probably hands down the most utilitarian handgun ever made. And it's got a great size, a great capacity. It can be used for concealed carry. It can be used as a duty gun. Shit, SOCOM uses them, outfits their SF guys with these things. Like, I love the size and the ergonomics. And look, you've heard me say this before, it's the Honda Accord of handguns. I mean, it's going to go 250,000 miles. It's always going to start, whether it's winter or summer. It's the kind of gun that you give your kids when they're ready to kind of, protect themselves in their home or something like that. Anytime anyone ever asks me and is new to handguns and says, what kind of handgun should I get? I say start with a Glock 19 and then move up from there, right? So
Yep.
to have the Glock 44 be the same dimensions, even with the magazine size, the same dimensions as the Glock 19, really presents an interesting prospect for training, right? Where you can grab a Tupperware container full of 22 and just have at it, without a ton of ammo expense and all that kind of stuff, and run through drills and things like that. And I think you bring up a really interesting point when you first held it, right? It's super light. The reason why it's light is obviously it has the polymer grip module and that sort of thing, but it also has a hybrid polymer steel slide. And basically what it is, for those who haven't held the Glock 44, seen one up close, is it's a skeletonized slide. So it has a solid steel kind of support structure with the rest of the slide is basically, injected polymer kind of thing, right? So you're right, it gives it its rigidity that it needs to move back and forth on the frame as it's recoiling and that sort of thing. And it really does feel like a toy. So we were sort of skeptical about the seriousness of this when we decided to try and take it for a test drive in a training scenario.
Yeah, but I have to admit, and I say this about all 22s, even to go, like one of my favorite guns to shoot is my, Ruger 1022 rifle. Because I always say, I feel like you're shooting a laser beam, right?
Yeah.
You can, you feel like you can knock the wings off a fly with it. You can pull the trigger a million times as fast as you want, and the thing doesn't move at all.
Yeah.
Very little recoil. So similarly, when you're shooting a 22 handgun, similar thing, very little recoil. You can pull the trigger as fast as you want. You feel like the sights hardly move. That said, when you and I got to the range and I dumped maybe 20 rounds through it right away, just to get a feel for the trigger and the recoil. The idea that every bullet was going in the same hole is what you're thinking in your head, because there's so little recoil movement. When you actually go see your target, and particularly when you and I started running through.
Well, let's hold off on that. We'll set up the scenario on this. We'll set up the scenario on this. But yeah, it did feel like a toy, and you're sort of thinking in your head, like, how could this be the same? It just couldn't be the same.
Yeah.
So here's, for the listeners, here's what we decided to do. And I was really skeptical going in that this would be truly wind up being an apples to apples comparison. I mean, I thought there's just no way, with a 22, the lack of recoil, the Glock 44 has a slightly lighter trigger pull than the Glock 19. All these factors at the end of the video would make it seem like it's too big a difference to really compare the two, and that maybe it won't be a good training tool. So what I decided to do, and it's not like a perfectly scientific experiment, I decided that we would run Chris through the IDPA 5x5 classifier and Chris that is what he runs, is a Glock 19. We'd run Chris through the classifier with his Glock 19, and then we'd run Chris through the classifier with the Glock 44. So Chris going into that, and then we just determine, like, hey, how similar were the scores? Like, is it just totally lopsided in favor of the 22 because of its lighter trigger pull and less recoil and all that kind of stuff? The sights are very similar. Mag changes and all that kind of stuff. Is it really going to make how similar is it going to be? And that could give us some idea of how good a training tool it is. Going into it, Chris, when you were sitting there on the line with your Glock 19 thinking about it, what did you think the result would be?
I actually thought it was going to be a vast improvement over shooting a 9mm, just because of the limited recoil and the sense of, man, I can keep every bullet going into the hole of the last round that I just fired. So I assumed, because you felt like you could run the gun faster, that and with the limited recoil, that there was going to be a tremendous difference between shooting the 19 and shooting the Glock 19 and shooting the Glock 44. I was incorrect.
You were incorrect. Now, let's set this up real quick. For those of you who don't know what the IDPA 5x5 classifier is, it's a classifier that was just implemented in 2019, and it really does kind of, I think it distills down pretty well. And I know there will be USPSA guys that kind of look down their noses at us on this, but it really does distill down your pistol skills. And as Chris and I both have proven, we're fairly decent shots and we do pretty well in competitions, but the 5x5 classifier, I mean, I'm sure if we ran through it a couple more times, it would be fine, but we were not like, slinging lead like GMs or anything like that. So but for those of you that don't know it, it's the first 5 rounds is freestyle to the body. The second 5 rounds is strong hand only. The third string is 5 rounds to the body, reload 5 rounds to the body, and then the fourth string is 4 to the body, 1 to the head. And it's great because you can just, it's 25 shots or something, and
25 shots, yep.
You can just shoot at one target and score it right there. You don't have to go back and tape and do all that kind of stuff. I think it's shot from about 10 yards, so it's not super close, but it's not super far. I think it does a great job of showing off your basic speed and accuracy and your ability to discriminate, and also using strong hand only, your ability to kind of balance shooting freestyle versus shooting, manipulating how you're holding the handgun and lining up your sights with just one hand. So it's a pretty good litmus test for your abilities and for a handgun's capability, right? So
yeah, and I'll admit the one thing that when we talk about the actual course of fire that I was most surprised about is I always overthink my strong hand firing, yeah. Right? Because everybody hates shooting a gun with one hand when you're trying to hit a little 8-inch circle. I am horrible about pulling rounds, like probably most shooters, to the, I'm a right-handed, so to the left and down.
Right.
Just to, again, when I picked up the 44, assuming that the light trigger pull, all the things we've already talked about, that wouldn't be a problem. It turned out that bad mechanics are bad mechanics, regardless of what gun you're firing. And I think that's the conclusion. So, when I shot the 44, they weren't as far to the right or the left, and they maybe weren't as far down, but they certainly weren't in the center of the target.
Right.
So from I think when you're just going to go out and work on mechanics, it's perfect for that.
So you're hinting at what we found, and what did we find, Chris? When you shot your Glock 19 in a 5x5 classifier, and then you shot the Glock 44 in the 5x5 classifier, what did we find?
The scores were almost identical.
Yeah.
For all intent and purposes, the scores were identical.
I was blown away. I mean, we still classified in the same area. You still classified in the same area, and the score maybe on the Glock 22 was 2 or 3/10 of a second faster, but your accuracy was very similar, and it was. I was really surprised at the apples to apples comparison of the two.
Now, what I do think is, and we were talking about this on the range, we just did one string of fire with both handguns.
Right.
We didn't test this theory, although I believe it to be true, that if I were to run the Glock 44, let's say 5 times in a row, and I were to run the Glock 19 5 times in a row, I think the 44 would show I think I could get a lot faster, quicker on the 44 than the 19, only because the easiness with each shot follow-up.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point.
Mechanics are mechanics.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. We need that's if we're doing this as quasi-scientifically as we can, look, you had never you threw like 3 or 4 magazines through the Glock 44 while we were prepping for the classifier. So, but it's certainly a brand new handgun, and your Glock 19 you've run 80 million times, and so there might have been a little unfamiliarity, a little bit of like muscle memory and brain rewiring that would have sort of said, hey, when I'm shooting the Glock 44, I only need to do this, and I can get it like, where I need the bullets to go and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there was definitely that. But then we ran the same thing with me. And what happened there?
Yeah. Again, very similar, right?
Yeah.
Your score was also very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, so very similar scores. I ran my Glock 19X, which I'd been running at a bunch of competitions, and have recently switched to the Sig, like a Franken Sig that I've built around the P320 RX compact, and actually I just slapped on a Legion X5 frame on the bottom of that and cut off 2 pieces of Picatinny rail to make it fit. But so I've been running an optic for most of the past year, but this one I just ran a straight 19X with no optic on it, and then the Glock 44, and literally I had better accuracy but slower speed than you, and I had very comparable scores, and we both scored in the marksman category.
Yeah.
So
which was a little pathetic.
They're gonna see it in the video, Chris. So there's no reason to not own up to it now.
Although I was thinking about shooting as a marksman, which, look, we're still better than 99.8% of the country, right?
We're sandbagging.
We're sandbagging,
right?
And of course, I was a little butthurt by the end of that, so I had to pull my Glock 34 out and run it several more times.
Yeah.
And I was able to get into the sharpshooter category running my Glock 34 after running it maybe 3 more times on my own.
Okay, cool guy.
But that was it's humbling.
Yeah.
I think the getting into the idea of mechanics, where the gun is really good at helping you work through certain things, which again is a time constraint. The magazine reload, although the magazine is a little lighter, the mechanics of it are the same, but it is a little lighter. So I don't maybe that's not a complete apples to apples comparison. But for me, I know where I lose a lot of my time when I'm doing those is the fundamentals of just my hand position on the firearm when I address the target the first time. I tend to futz with it.
Yeah.
But because it's the same size, you could argue the weight thing. Simple, drawing and addressing the target. That I think it's a perfect training tool for getting that first round off, right?
Yeah.
So if you just wanted to, do a drill where you want to come up in a, one shot to the target, which again, it's pretty much the same trigger pull. You don't have to worry, you don't have to manage the recoil as much. But if you're working on that very first target, getting your, taking it out of the holster, getting, properly holding the
right.
firearm, pulling that first trigger pull off, I think that's as good as any other firearm you're going to use. Repetitive shots, you could probably argue because, again, the lack of the recoil from a 19, so you theoretically your follow-on shots could be faster.
Yeah.
But I think even on the 44, I tend to anticipate my shots, and strangely enough, I'm guessing shooting a 22 caliber is no different. You're still going to, want to tend to anticipate the recoil. So from that perspective alone is why I would want to get it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we proved that it's a good training tool. I mean, it worked for me. It worked for you. The scores were similar to the 9mm versus the 22, and I'll be honest with you, like, I get a little bit of ammo here and there sent to me, but like I buy my own ammo for competitions and things like that, and so. I'll have to admit, and I'm enamored with 22s, and I mentioned this in the video when it posts. I have a little side comment. I would love to run a 2-gun competition with my 22 AR and a 22 and the Glock 44. I mean,
Yeah.
I just think it's so fun, and it's less of a God, loud and all this kind of, I don't know. I just think that they're elegant and fun to run and operate, and cheap because of the 22 ammo. I would love to see something like that get going, but I think we did prove that it was a good training tool. I think that for saving cost on ammo and just taking that little bit of time, to go out and do some training and practice where you're not having to factor in like, shit, I've only got 500 rounds of 9mm right now, and I've got a match coming up in a few weeks. I don't want to blaze through it. Maybe this is, well, not maybe. I think that this is a good alternative for it. I'm not sure what the pricing is going to be. I think you're going to probably see them on the shelves at your local gun store in the high 2s, low 3s, hundreds of dollars kind of thing. So it's a little bit steep for a 22, I think, and there are other alternatives out there, but if you're a Glock guy and you have a Glock 19 or a Glock 34 and blah, 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 and that's what you use, there's really no other alternative.
Yeah, well, if you said high 2, lows 3s, I for some reason was afraid it was still going to be Glock priced, which you're going to pay 400 or some north of 400 for it. So somewhere in the $200 to $300 range to me.
I think the MSRP is in the mid 4s. It's like 425 or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard people talk about how it would be high. I mean, what would it be, like a $350 shelf price?
Are they for sale yet? Is it even out?
I don't know. We'd have to look. But I don't think that it's going to be unapproachably priced. I think it is going to be more than a traditional, a full-size 22. Like if you were getting an M&P 22 or something like that.
Yep.
And I think the price is not going to be so prohibitive that you wouldn't want to add this to your toolbox for training purposes.
Yeah, and that's good to know. It's funny. I'm just cruising online while we're sitting here talking,
and that raises the question for me now. Like, do I have to get a 22 conversion kit for my Sig?
Not to go down another path, but what were you shooting? You were shooting that Sig, and you had the 320 there as well with the bullseye sight. Or we'll save this one for another discussion?
Oh yeah, we could save that. We did just for a little teaser, we did take I have for testing Sig P365 SAS, the Sig anti-snag, that has the embedded, the Miopta bullseye sight embedded into the slide, and I'm planning to kind of do a little comparison video on that, my impressions on that versus the Glock 43X, which is the 10+1 Glock 43 concealed carry handgun. They're a little bit apples to oranges, but if you're looking at options out there for sort of a do-it-all carry gun, I thought it would be worth kind of just giving my impressions on that. But we're putting together a video on that. But I think the Glock 44 is fun. I think my mind has been changed on it, and I think others who give it a whirl will and look at it from the perspective that Chris and I had it. Will think similarly once they play around with it.
Yep. We'll save that for another time.
Yeah. Now, do you want to hint at anyone on the little classifier we ran with our PCCs as well when we were out at the?
What? You're breaking up,
Chris.
I think we're running. I can't. Static.
Is there interference?
See, can't hear. Well, broken.
Don't want to go there. All right. Well, I think we did a pretty good show here, Chris, and And one of the things I want people to remember is, you know, we will be releasing a video on this very soon on GearScout YouTube. So you can see us in action taking this Glock 44 and putting it to the test up against a Glock 19. You know, you can see in detail how we scored and all that kind of stuff. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. As always, please be sure to share this podcast with your friends. Leave a review on your favorite podcast app as well. Also, make sure to visit GearScout online on YouTube, Instagram. Oh, and a note to the listeners on Instagram, on the GearScout Instagram, we posted a video. One of the little side things Chris and I did is we tried out the Glock 44 with a threaded barrel and a dead air suppressor on it, and shot several magazines through it. It was cool, but we did get a lot of like kind of debris in our face from that thing.
Yeah.
So that was not that cool.
That one threw me a little bit. I wasn't expecting the debris, but it is fun as hell to shoot that gun suppressed.
It is. And it's funny, Chris, because I've had the same thing happen to me with the M&P 22 compact when I have a Silencer Co. What is it, like a Sparrow or something? Like, what's the Silencer Co. suppressor that's kind of square? And it I don't remember, but I've got it on the end of that, and it's, you know, when you put it in, particularly in a new shooter's hand, they're like, ugh, you know, it's very unpleasant for them because there's a little bit of like kind of gunpowder pushback, I guess, from that.
Yeah, I can't. I can see the one you're talking about it in my head, but I can't think of the name.
Yeah. So anyway, make sure to go to Instagram. You'll see and hear that little shooting test with the Glock 44 and a dead air 22 suppressor on it. Also, check out all of our stuff on Facebook, on the web for videos and pics and all that kind of fun stuff. You know, make sure you visit all those different platforms. Until next time, shoot straight, be safe, and look cool doing it. Thanks, Chris.
See you, brother.